James lived alone in a small minimalist apartment in the city. He worked as a graphic designer, his days filled with deadlines, emails, and long hours staring at a screen. He didn't ask for much in life, just a quiet existence. But that morning, everything changed. As he stepped out of his apartment and into the hallway, he noticed that the usual sound of people moving around, doors opening, footsteps, voices, was gone. The hallway was empty, eerily silent. "Hello?" James called out, but there was no answer. His voice seemed muffled, swallowed by the air itself. He walked to the elevator, pressing the button. It dinged, and the doors opened, but the usual hum of the building's mechanics was absent. The elevator was frozen, like the world around it had just stopped. He stepped inside, unsure of what was happening. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, but instead of beginning its descent, the elevator remained still. He pushed the button for the ground floor again. Nothing. He pushed every button. Still, the elevator didn't move. "Is this some kind of joke?" James muttered to himself. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. When James finally decided to take the stairs, he made his way to the ground floor. As he stepped out into the lobby, the silence hit him again. The room was empty, yet the air was thick with something he couldn't quite place. He walked to the front door of the building, but it was locked. The lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows on the walls. He pulled at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. He stepped back and looked around the lobby. The clock on the wall had stopped at 8:32 a.m., the same time as his watch. His heartbeat quickened. There was something profoundly unsettling about the scene around him, like he was trapped in a world that had lost its rhythm. "Hello?" he called again, this time with more urgency. "Is anyone here?" But there was no response, just the stillness. He ran to the windows, trying to look out into the street. What he saw only deepened the terror. The cars, the pedestrians, the entire street was frozen in time. A woman was caught mid-step, her body suspended in the air, her expression frozen in a moment of confusion. The street lights were stuck in mid-swing, the traffic lights unblinking. James pounded on the window. Nothing moved. "Time, it's not moving," he whispered to himself. "It can't be." James knew that he wasn't imagining things. Something supernatural was happening. He returned to his apartment, pacing back and forth. He searched his apartment, looking for any sign of what had caused the time stoppage, but everything appeared normal. His TV was still turned off, his books untouched, and his phone screen was blank. His mind raced. He needed answers. Maybe he could call someone, but when he tried to dial a number, the call didn't go through. There was no connection, as if the world had severed itself from the rest of reality. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a soft tapping at his apartment door. James froze, his heart racing. Who could possibly be outside? No one had been moving for hours, yet there it was, a noise coming from the other side of the door. He opened it slowly. Standing there was a man he didn't recognize. His clothes were old, like they belonged to a different time, and his face was pale, almost sickly. The man didn't speak, only stared at James with an expression of quiet despair. "Who are you?" James asked, his voice trembling. The man opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his eyes widened, as if he were trying to warn James. Then, with a sudden movement, the man reached forward and grabbed James by the arm. Before James could react, the man whispered, "The flow of time is broken. The past, the present, the future, they're all tangled. You must undo it before it's too late." And just as quickly as the man appeared, he vanished, his form dissolving into thin air. James stood there in shock. His pulse hammered in his ears, and he felt the weight of the man's words press down on him. Over the next few hours, or was it days, James tried to make sense of what was happening. He spent hours in his apartment, staring out the window at the frozen world. He couldn't get a clear answer on why time had stopped, but he was beginning to understand something crucial. Time wasn't just paused, it was fractured. The normal flow of events had been interrupted, and the world had been trapped in a moment that refused to progress. In his desperation, James began researching everything he could on time anomalies, supernatural disturbances, and anything that could explain what he was experiencing. He read about theories of time loops, about entities that could manipulate the flow of time, and about places where the fabric of reality itself could be torn. But nothing explained why it was happening to him. That's when he remembered the man, the stranger who had warned him. James understood that whatever had caused this disturbance was bigger than him. He wasn't just a victim of some random event. He was part of a cosmic puzzle, one that needed to be solved before it consumed everything. James knew that to break the curse, he needed to find the source of the disruption. He had no idea where to start, but he felt an undeniable pull towards the city's old district, the area where time had always felt strange to him, as if the past had never truly let go. He left his apartment, walking through the empty streets, stepping over frozen bodies, and past cars that were suspended in mid-motion. The city felt like a graveyard, its people trapped in time, its streets abandoned. Finally, he reached the old district, an area full of abandoned buildings, forgotten memories, and strange symbols etched into the walls. The air here felt different, heavy with history, as if the past were trying to reclaim the present. It was here that he found it, a cracked, ancient clock tower at the center of the district. Its hands were stuck, frozen at 8:32 a.m., the exact time everything had stopped. James knew this was where it all began. The clock tower held the key to the fracture in time. James climbed to the top of the clock tower, where he found an old mechanism, the gears of the clock that had once turned the hands of time. But now, they were stuck. The mechanism had been tampered with, twisted in ways that defied logic. He saw a strange symbol carved into the gears, glowing faintly. He knew this symbol. It was the same one the strange man had worn on his clothes. James reached for the symbol and touched it, his fingers burning with an unnatural heat. As soon as his skin made contact, the world around him seemed to shudder. The clock's hands jerked to life, the gears grinding as they turned. The world outside began to move again, the stillness breaking apart as time resumed its flow. The city came back to life, slowly at first, but soon everything was normal again. The people moved, the cars drove, and the world resumed its rhythm. But James knew that things would never be the same. He had seen what lay beyond the veil of reality, the fragility of time, the power of forces that could stop it, and the consequences of meddling with the natural order. Though the world had returned to normal, James couldn't shake the feeling that the disturbance had only been a warning. Time, once broken, could always be shattered again. Emily arrived home that evening, the rain still pouring heavily outside. She set the record player on the coffee table, its weight almost comforting in her hands. She removed the mysterious record from its sleeve and placed it carefully on the turntable. As she lowered the needle, the air in the room seemed to shift. It was a subtle change, but it was there. The first crackling notes played, soft at first, like an old melody trying to break through the dust of time. The music was haunting, strange, and oddly familiar. Emily felt an eerie sense of déjà vu wash over her as the sound filled the room. It wasn't like any music she had heard before, yet it felt like it was speaking to her, as if it held a message hidden within its notes. But as the song continued, something began to happen. The room around her started to distort. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, and the light from the lamp flickered erratically. The music grew louder, more intense, until the entire room seemed to pulse with the rhythm. Then, without warning, the needle jerked and the sound stopped. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She looked down at the record, and to her shock, the needle had moved backward. The music was rewinding. She tried to lift the needle, but it wouldn't budge. The turntable spun the record backward, forcing the music to play in reverse. But when she glanced up at the clock on the wall, her blood ran cold. The hands of the clock were moving backward too. Slowly, the world around her seemed to shift, as if she were witnessing time itself unravel. The next morning, Emily woke up with a headache, the strange events of the previous night still fresh in her mind. She had dismissed it as a dream, a trick of her tired mind. But as she got out of bed and walked into the kitchen, she immediately realized something was wrong. The kitchen looked different, slightly out of place, as if the room had been rearranged overnight. The coffee cups were in different spots, and the newspaper on the counter had a headline that made her stomach turn. Local woman missing. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strange part was that Emily was certain she had seen that headline before. It was from a week ago. Confused, she reached for her phone to check the date. To her horror, the date read April 3rd, when it should have been April 4th. Her heart skipped a beat. She checked the time. The seconds were ticking backward. It couldn't be. Could the record have caused this? Could it really reverse time, even if only for a moment? That was when she noticed the most terrifying part of it all. There was no memory of her ever having been to the thrift shop. No memory of buying the record. Her mind couldn't reconcile what was happening. Emily tried to go about her day, but the reality around her kept shifting. The people she interacted with acted as if nothing had changed, but she could feel it, the eerie sense that something wasn't right. She tried to tell herself that she was simply imagining things, that the strange occurrences were the result of stress or exhaustion. But as the days passed, the sense of dread grew. Then that evening, as Emily sat down at the record player again, she made a decision. She had to understand what was happening. She placed the record on the turntable once more and lowered the needle. The same haunting melody filled the room. But this time, Emily focused all of her attention on the music. She willed herself to understand its message, to unlock its secret. As the music played in reverse once again, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to be consumed by the strange ethereal sound. The room around her began to distort again, the walls bending and warping, the air thick with a heavy, oppressive energy. And then, in a flash, she saw it. A vision. It was brief, just a moment. But it was enough to make her blood run cold. She saw herself, but it wasn't the Emily she knew. This Emily was older, disheveled, and her eyes were filled with terror. She was sitting in front of the record player, a look of horror on her face as she tried to stop the needle from spinning backward. It was as if Emily had witnessed her own future, and the future was bleak. Emily grew desperate. She tried to stop playing the record, but the more she attempted to disrupt its power, the more she realized she was powerless against it. The record didn't just rewind time, it reversed it. Each time the music played, it was as if Emily were slipping further into an alternate version of reality, one where nothing was in her control. Her attempts to undo the damage only made things worse. Each day, her past seemed to rewrite itself, each version of her life slowly becoming more twisted and unrecognizable. The people around her seemed to forget things, important things, and she found herself struggling to keep track of time, never sure if she was in the present or the past. The most chilling realization came when Emily discovered a pattern in the rewinding. Each time she played the record, she could hear a faint voice in the music, a voice calling her name. At first, she thought it was a trick of her mind, but it soon became clear that the voice was coming from the record itself. "Emily," it whispered, over and over. "Emily, you are mine." She realized that the record was not simply a time-altering artifact. It was alive, and it was using her to feed on the unraveling of time. In a final attempt to end the torment, Emily tried one last desperate act. She took the record from the turntable, clutching it tightly in her hands. The air around her crackled with unnatural energy, as if the world itself was waiting for her next move. She went outside and walked to the edge of the city, determined to destroy the record. As she stood at the edge of a bridge, she held it high above her head, preparing to throw it into the river below. But before she could release it, the voice came again, louder this time. "No, you cannot stop it. You belong to me now." The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Spinning around, she saw the older version of herself, the one from her vision, staring back at her, her face twisted in despair. "Don't do it," the older Emily whispered. "I tried. I couldn't escape. You'll never escape." The sound of the record began to fade as Emily let go. She dropped it into the river, watching it disappear beneath the surface. For a moment, the world around her felt still, as if the weight of time itself had been lifted. But then she felt a cold, unnatural chill wash over her. The record was gone, but its presence remained. The reality she had known was gone. Emily stood alone, staring at the river, knowing that time was still playing its games, and that she had just become part of its eternal cycle. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the streets are empty and the city feels like it's asleep. I had just finished work late, as usual, and was heading home. The night air was crisp, and the street lights cast a soft orange glow across the pavement. I didn't mind walking through the quiet, dark streets most of the time. It was peaceful. But tonight, something felt off. As I walked down the empty sidewalk, my footsteps echoed, and I noticed that I was alone. That strange feeling that someone was watching me crept up my spine. I glanced over my shoulder, but the street was still empty. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. But then, I saw him. At the end of the street, near an alleyway, stood a man. He was tall, too tall, and he was just standing there, motionless. I could see his face in the dim light of the street lamp. And the first thing I noticed was the smile. A wide, unnervingly unnatural smile. It stretched across his face like something from a nightmare. His eyes, however, were blank, cold, empty. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with that smile. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't normal. I could feel the weight of his gaze even from a distance. What kind of person would stand alone on a street corner, smiling like that, especially at such an hour? I quickened my pace, thinking maybe he was just a drunk or some weirdo. But as I passed, I heard the softest sound, a whisper. His voice, faint and almost imperceptible, said, "Come closer." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't breathe. I kept walking, faster now. My legs trembling, but my eyes kept darting back to him. And there he was, still standing, still smiling. Only now, he wasn't just standing still. His body seemed to sway slightly, as though he was moving, but in a way that didn't make sense. Almost as if he was part of the shadows themselves. I told myself to keep walking, to just ignore him, but I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder once again. And when I did, the smile was gone. The man had moved. He was no longer standing at the end of the street. He was closer now, much closer. He had somehow crossed the entire street without me seeing him move. I broke into a run, my feet pounding against the pavement. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, slow, but deliberate. I dared not look back. I could hear the distant whisper again, "Come closer." I rounded a corner, almost tripping over my own feet. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought it might burst. When I turned onto my block, I spotted my apartment building just ahead. I could see the light in my window. It was a safe place, but I wasn't safe yet. I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. The man wasn't far behind me. He was closer. So close, in fact, that I could feel his breath on my neck. A cold, clammy sensation that sent a jolt of terror through my veins. I reached the front door of my building, fumbling for my keys. I turned to check, and in that moment, I saw him. He was standing across the street, in the middle of the road. He was still smiling, but his smile was even wider now. His teeth gleamed in the dim light, sharp and unnatural, as though they were too many for his mouth. He tilted his head, staring at me with those hollow eyes. Before I could react, I heard a voice inside my head, loud and clear. "He's not going to stop. Not until you let him." I ran into the building, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I leaned against it, gasping for breath. I locked the door, checked the windows, and tried to calm myself. He was just a man, a creep. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was all in my head. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't. That smile, that voice, none of it was normal. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. The apartment was quiet, but something felt wrong. I walked over to my window, looking out across the street. There he was, the man. But now, he wasn't standing on the sidewalk. He was on the rooftop of the building across from mine, staring directly into my window, still smiling. His head tilted to the side, as though waiting for me to make the next move. And I realized, then, there was no escape. He would always be there, watching, smiling. Weeks passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I went outside, I'd see him. In the shadows, on the rooftops, in the corner of my eye. His smile never faded. One day, while walking to the store, I heard his voice again. It was louder this time, as if it were coming from all directions. "Come closer." I tried to run. I couldn't breathe. My legs gave out beneath me. I looked up, and there he was, standing in front of me, blocking my path. The smile stretched wider, and I could see the tips of his teeth now, sharp and jagged. His eyes were voids, endless and empty. And then he whispered, "It's time." Before I could scream, before I could run, everything went black. My name is Ethan, and this happened to me when I was living alone in a small apartment in the city. It was a night I'll never forget. I had just moved into the building, a modest place with peeling paint and creaky floors. Everything seemed normal until the first night I noticed the apartment directly across from mine. At first, it was nothing unusual. Windows, doors, typical city apartment life. But then I began noticing strange lights flickering at odd hours. Sometimes, the apartment would be completely dark, and suddenly a single window would glow with a dim, pale light. One night, around 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep. I went to my balcony for a cigarette. The street was quiet, and only the apartment across the street had the light on. I leaned on the railing, smoking, and noticed a man and a woman inside, standing very still, almost like statues. Their heads were close together, and I could faintly hear what sounded like whispering or muttering. I strained my ears, but it was hard to understand. Minutes passed, and their movements became strange. The man's gestures were stiff, unnatural, and the woman seemed frozen in place. My stomach twisted with unease. Something about them felt wrong. I blinked, and suddenly, the man's face caught the light in a way that made my heart stop. I could swear it was exactly like my own face. Every detail. Same eyes, same jawline. My hands shook. I told myself it must be a trick of the light, a reflection, or maybe just my imagination. But the feeling in my chest tightened. Fear, disbelief, and something darker I couldn't name. The woman suddenly moved closer to him, and I noticed she wasn't moving naturally. Her head tilted unnaturally, her arms stiff. My mind screamed that this wasn't real, and yet I could see every detail. I stumbled back from the balcony, my heart racing. I tried to call a friend, anyone, but my phone screen flickered strangely and then went black. For weeks after that night, I began noticing more things. Sounds from the empty apartment. Shadows moving behind the curtains, always when no one should be there. Sometimes, I would catch glimpses of the man across the street standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. But when I looked again, the apartment seemed empty. One night, I dreamt that I walked into the apartment across the street. The man approached me. I felt his eyes on me, and my own reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. My reflection smiled, a cruel, knowing smile that froze my blood. I woke up sweating, heart pounding, and for days I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I decided to investigate. I spoke to neighbors, asking casually about the apartment. Everyone shrugged. "No one's living there," they said. "It's been empty for months." Empty? Then, who had I been watching that first night? I told myself it had to be a hallucination. Stress. Lack of sleep. I tried to ignore it. But the flickering lights, the shadows, the figure with my face, it didn't stop. One evening, I returned home late. The building was unusually silent. I stepped into the lobby and noticed a small envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single piece of paper. Written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, it said, "You are not alone. I have always been here, waiting." I dropped the paper, my hands trembling, my mind erased. Could it be a prank? A neighbor with too much time? But the handwriting, it looked eerily like my own. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, eyes fixed on the apartment across the street. And then I saw it. The man. My face. Standing at the window, watching, waiting. I didn't dare blink. My mind was screaming, heart pounding, stomach twisting. And then the man raised a hand, pointing directly at me. Suddenly, my own hand rose on its own. I had no control. My body obeyed some unseen force. The man's lips moved, and I felt like I could hear him in my mind. "You belong to me." I collapsed onto the floor, shaking, unable to move. When I looked up, the apartment was empty. The lights were off. Nothing there but shadows. I tried to leave the building, move out, anything. But no matter where I went, I felt watched. Mirrors became my enemy. Reflections sometimes didn't match reality. My face in the glass sometimes smiled when I wasn't smiling. Weeks turned into months. Friends noticed I was pale, anxious, restless. I didn't tell them about the man across the street, the figure that was somehow me. Then one night, I received another envelope. Same handwriting. This one read, "Time is shorter than you think. Soon we will be one." I realized then that it wasn't just a hallucination. It was a warning, a doppelganger, something that was waiting for me, or waiting to replace me. I've moved apartments several times since then. Each time, I check across the street. Each time, I see the flickering light. Each time, I see him. My reflection. My double. Watching. Waiting. Sometimes, I catch myself staring into mirrors for hours, wondering if I'm really me, or if the man across the street has already started living my life somewhere else. I don't know if this will ever end. Maybe it's a curse, a psychological trap, or some strange cosmic joke. But I know this. The apartment across the street will always be watching, and so will he. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear a whisper, faint but clear. "You're mine." Under the light of a new moon, the clouds were as thin as gauze. The dirt road leading into the forest was so quiet that the sound of dry leaves sounded like bones scraping against each other. Alex walked ahead, the flashlight hanging from his backpack swaying, cutting a thin line of light through the fog. Maya followed closely behind, her hands cold, each step like she had to be pulled out of the mud. Leo walked behind, tripod and camera bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes deep but alert, scanning the surroundings like a sentry, silently counting his breaths to keep calm. They had read the worn-out diary, an anonymous priest written in blotchy reddish-brown ink about a village forgotten because of its debt to shadows. Maya stopped abruptly, grabbing Alex's sleeve. "Do you feel it? Like someone hungry?" Alex laughed, reassuringly in a light voice.
I don't know, guys. I'm getting a really bad feeling
Perfect
about
for a
this.
Halloween video. He raised the camera, panning around. Fog, trees, darkness. The lens caught a few specks of dust that shone like fireflies, or other things, small and staring back. Then the village appeared without warning, without a single light, without a puff of smoke. Only the air was heavy as a stone pressing on the chest. In front of the village gate, a rickety sign hung by a rusty string. Alex brought the flashlight closer. Burned black words were etched into the wood. "The unharvested shadows will find the curious." Maya took a step back. Alex smiled again, but his eyes were trembling. He pushed the gate open. The hinges made a long, screeching sound, like someone sucking in a breath to contain the pain. Inside, the village streets were filled with mud and leaves. The doors were half open, like cave entrances. Alex led the group into the first house, its wooden floors creaking. The musty smell mixed with the smell of burning incense crept into Maya's nose, making her cough slightly. On the table, an overturned earthenware bowl still lay. Alex flipped the bowl over. Below was a black and white photograph, blurry and cracked. A group of people in brown shirts, holding sickles, standing in the middle of a rice field that had been harvested to the stump. Leaving the house, they walked deeper. Every strange sound began to creep around them, light footsteps behind them. But when they turned around, there was only mist. Sighs from the abandoned well, whispers mixed in the wind, like many voices overlapping. Not harvested yet. Alex leaned into each door, panting with hunting instinct. Blurred figures began to touch the edges of the frame, just the corners of eyes. But Maya could clearly see a pair of eyes red as burning coals peering through. She grabbed Alex's hand so hard it hurt. "Alex, stop. It's a trap." Alex stubbornly. "I just need a few more shots." Suddenly, a window banged as if someone had crashed into it. All three spun. Behind the cracked glass, a face appeared for a moment. Hollow, eyes two dark red holes, mouth open but making no sound, then suddenly gone. Alex dropped the camera to the floor, the indicator light still flashing. They gathered their things and ran to the middle of the village. There, a small square led into many crisscrossing alleys. Houses on both sides changed positions. Windows seemed to turn to watch them. Leo counted his steps, but the count kept slipping away, as if someone had broken the numbers in his head. A hand reached out from the void and grabbed Leo's wrist. Leo jerked, jumped back, the other hand flailing reflexively, leaving 5 long purple marks on his skin, like the marks of fingers without flesh. They were lost in a corridor, in the village. Maya closed her eyes, took a deep breath, trying to find a beat other than her own. And she heard it. Under her feet, in the ground, something moving. Like many hands crawling, searching for calves, ankles. "Don't stand still," Maya whispered. "They can pull if we stand still." They continued walking, and then the corridor suddenly opened in front of a small church, the bell tower broken in half, the clock face frozen at 3:13. Alex pushed the door. The smell of burnt incense came like a wave. On the altar, portraits were pasted on top of each other. Peasant faces, dark eyes, gentle but deep down were tired and resentful. Some of the photos were torn, revealing behind them were old words. Called to pay rice tax, didn't return. Strange disease after harvest. Missing in the well. The paper shook even though there was no wind. A dry bell rang from the broken tower, not knowing who had rung it. The candles in the church flickered, then flared up a little before going out. Maya held her head. "They're coming!" Leo grabbed Alex's shoulder. "Go, now!" But the crescent moon suddenly rushed out from behind the clouds, casting silver light on the broken window. And as the moonlight touched the church floor, from the dark corners, figures began to step out. A figure approached Alex, reaching out to touch his collar. He was lifted, his feet kicking into the air. A scream stuck in his throat, as if swallowed by the thick air. The smell of corpses and incense smoke, mixed with the smell of burning straw, lingered around. Alex was mumbling, his hands flailing. Leo let out a low growl, lunged forward, grabbed Alex's stomach, and pulled him back. He felt those dry, scratched fingers dig into Alex's skin like hooks. He pulled hard. Alex's body fell into Leo's hands like a sandbag, both of them rolling down the church steps. Maya, still holding her head, suddenly opened her eyes, grabbed the metal bracelet, put it on Alex's wrist, her hands trembling. "Alex, the number, the document in the diary." Alex gasped. He rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a piece of paper marked with a marker. On it, under the phrase, "Do not call their names," there was a short, hastily written and ugly verse. "The shadow demands its share. The person returns the favor. The black fire shines, the boundary opens. When the moon is a scythe, place the ring between the shadow and the bone. When the..." Maya recited in a whisper. She placed the Jiamchio ring in the space between the three people and the shadows. The ring did not touch the ground. It hung there, as if tied to something invisible. A very soft crack, like a tight string being cut. A few shadows dissolved like smoke. Only their red eyes fell like upside-down fireflies, extinguished in the air. The wall cracked open like a mouth. Portraits pasted on the wall fell out, flying around in the wind that came from nowhere. Breathing, the sound of wood groaning, the sound of people screaming from the ground. The passages outside, seen through the windows, seemed to change places, retreating when someone tried to step forward, sliding like the surface of water. "Not long enough. Just hold them. A little," Maya said, her eyes not leaving the circle. Leo lifted Alex up. "Which way?" Maya closed her eyes, feeling. Everything was like a moving maze, but there was a rhythm. The rhythm of the forest. She opened her eyes, pointing towards the side door of the church. They rushed out. The circle of judgment drifted along, following Alex like a black bird. Shadows spread out from both sides of the alley. A dry hand jumped up from the ground, grabbed Alex's ankle. He almost fell. Leo bent down and hit hard. The hand shattered into cold ash. "Don't stand still," Maya reminded. The shadows rushed forward, not slow this time. The circle of judgment shook, emitting a sound like metal rubbing against stone. Maya read the awkward words again, her voice starting to break. The largest shadow, probably the shadow of the old village chief from years ago, stretched out, its eyes red like two pieces of hot iron. It touched the edge of the circle and cried out. It took a step back, just one, but enough for the three of them to break free of the encirclement, dash through the broken fence, trample on rotting leaves, and breathe in the forest air. Leo ran ahead, then Alex, Maya. Behind them, the village stretched out, trying to hold them back with the alleys sliding under their feet. The wind came. The mist in the village was whipped back like a curtain. The shadows at the edges couldn't get through, their red eyes burning, then fading like dying embers. A long, long sigh, as if the whole village were exhaling. They didn't stop until they were deep in the forest. Leo plopped down, his back against the tree trunk. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were still alert. Alex put the camera on his lap, the light still flashing. I got it, he said, unsure. Maya hugged her knees, put her chin on them, inhaled the smell of damp leaves like medicine. We're out, she whispered. Temporarily. A week later, on Halloween night, Alex sat in his rented room, the window ajar, the sound of cars in the distance like a hazy river. He turned on the camera, reviewed the footage. In the frame, the fog shimmered beautifully like an effect. The door closed by itself, the window slammed shut, the hallway seemed to stretch out. Everything was there. The circle of judgment appeared in a few frames, black like a hole in the image. There was a very light knock on the door. He looked up. No one. In the silence, a very soft sigh passed by, as if coming from the corner of the wall. Alex stood up, walked to the window, pulled the curtains. Outside on the street, people were laughing, dressing up. Cheap witch and vampire masks danced under the neon lights. When he pulled the curtains back, in the reflection on the glass, Alex saw that behind him there was not only his shadow, there was also a thin, flat, long black streak, like a scythe leaning against the corner of the room. He turned around. The corner of the room was empty. Alex thought to himself, stress. The phone vibrated. A message from Maya. Are you listening tonight? Alex was about to reply, listen to what, when he heard it. In the sound of the wind seeping through the crack of the door, an old sound crept into the room. Tired but persistent. Not harvested yet. Leo texted the group, don't be alone. Lock the door. Alex looked up at the door lock. It was still locked. Then he looked at the floor. There were a few small black dust particles, like ash, lying in a semicircle at the threshold. The circle of the orb had fallen back at the edge of the forest that night. But here, something had left the mark of another circle. Alex opened the cupboard, looked for the priest's diary. On the last page, under the red-brown ink, there was a new line. The ink still wet, the smell of burnt incense lingering. They can't harvest the body. They will wait for the soul. He took a step back. In his mind flashed that red eye. The circle of the Guardians may be temporary, but the border is real. He texted back, come to my place tonight. Stay. Stay. Maya replied with a moon icon. Leo replied, I brought the rope. Alex smiled, half believing. What was the rope for? But then he remembered the moment they'd grabbed each other in the church. Perhaps that very bond was the only thing the shadow couldn't cut. Outside the window, Halloween bustled and then faded. Inside, 3 people sat side by side, candles placed around them, salt sprinkled on the threshold in a circle toward the window. If they need a way out, give them a way out, not in, Maya whispered. Leo tied the rope around the three people's wrists, linking them like another circle, made of material so ordinary that even ghosts despised it. But ordinary is hard to break. Near midnight, when the new moon pierced the clouds once more, the whisper came again, clearer, as if someone was standing close to their ear. Not harvested yet. Alex took a deep breath. We are not your fields. You have been taken. We do not pay with us. If necessary, we will tell. We will name what happened. Maya nodded, eyes closed as if listening. Leo gently tightened the rope. The whisper receded a little, like an old man turning away, disappointed and relieved. The candlelight swayed, then stopped. At the doorway, the half-circle of black ash faded, giving way to the yellow dust particles of the street. They fell asleep as the sky neared dawn. In his dream, Alex saw that field again. The harvesters bowed their heads, the horizon blurred like a stain. But this time, when he looked up, at the edge of the field was a small black line, thin as a thread, the forest. Many years later, every Halloween season, in university clubs or video channels, the story of the Golden Eye. It was rumored that every 100 years, the village opened its doors to harvest souls. Some people said they saw flashlights swaying in the mist. Some heard whispers like thin knives cutting through the wind. Alex, Maya, Leo did not return. They promised each other, if one day they needed to, they would go together and only together. They still heard the very light sighs in the windy night, like endless memories. But somewhere deep in the forest, the village still lay there. The houses changing places like board chess pieces. The cracked statue looked down at the dry hands crawling across the brick floor. The crescent moon occasionally turned into a scythe, licking the bright line on the warning board in front of the gate. The unharvested shadows will find the curious. And it seemed, somewhere in the shadows, a black circle still hovered, waiting for the right person to place it between the shadow and the bone. Because the border only exists when someone stands there to say, enough. It was already 10 o'clock at night. Nurse Mira was making her rounds in the old psychiatric hospital. This was her first night shift in this eerie building. While walking down the dimly lit corridor, she reached room number 13. Mira slowly placed her hand on the rusty doorknob. Inside lay a 22-year-old woman. A pale but strikingly beautiful girl sat on the bed, facing the cracked wall. Her lips moved slowly, whispering words no one could understand. The strange stillness inside the room made Mira's chest tighten. Her legs hesitated at the threshold, as if something unseen was pulling her back. She had heard stories of unusual patients here, some violent, some completely lost in their own worlds. But this was different. It was her first night here. The ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of the wind scraping against the window frames made the corridor feel even colder. Mira gripped her flashlight, wondering if she should step in. Gathering a bit of courage, Mira finally pushed the door open wider. The moment she stepped inside, the girl suddenly let out a chilling laugh and began twisting her body in unnatural ways. She was still facing the wall, but her neck turned all the way around to look at Mira. Cold sweat dripped from Mira's forehead. Her hands trembled as she backed away. Slamming the door shut, she ran down the corridor to the reception, calling for another nurse. Nurse Lena was at the desk, speaking on the phone. "Yes,
I
madam.
understand, Doctor.
Don't worry. She's
I'll make
safe.
sure the preparations
We're taking
are-
good care of her," Lena assured someone before hanging up. Seeing Mira's pale face, Lena frowned. "What happened, Mira? Why do you look so terrified?" Mira stammered and recounted everything she had just seen. Lena nodded slowly. "Oh, room number 13. That's Aisha. Her mother calls every night, sometimes every few minutes, to ask about her. They admitted her here 2 months ago and never came back." Mira's curiosity burned through her fear. What happened to her? How did she end up like this? Lena sighed and began to explain. Aisha was 22, a top student in her final year of architecture. Everyone admired her beauty and intelligence. But she lived in a dream world of her own making. She believed she would meet a mysterious artist, her soulmate, and rejected every suitor her parents brought home. She wrote about him in her journal every night, filling page with fantasies. Her parents thought it was harmless. Lena continued. One night, Aisha left her journal at the university library. A young man named Arav, one of her new classmates, found it and took it. He read every page, learning all her secrets and fantasies. The next day, he came to class wearing exactly the clothes she had described for her dream man. Aisha was drawn to him instantly. She forgot about the missing journal, believing she had finally met the man. Their relationship turned intense, even obsessive. Arav isolated her from her friends, especially from Rohan, her best friend who had loved her in silence. He began writing her name in blood, sending letters smeared with it, whispering strange things about destiny. Aisha became frightened, but she couldn't escape. One evening, when she visited Arav's apartment, she found her missing journal there, along with photos of several women. As she stared in shock, a middle-aged man entered the room. Don't be afraid. I'm Prakash, Arav's uncle. He's been unwell since his parents died. He collects things he finds beautiful. People, objects, anything. He doesn't understand emotions. If something he treasures breaks or disappoints him, he destroys it. Aisha is shocked to hear that he's battling illness. She goes over and asks, "What did you say, mentally ill?" Arav's uncle says yes. Aisha's heart stopped when she saw one of the photos, her own face pinned on the wall among other girls. The truth hit her. She ran out, shaking, and locked herself in her room for days, ignoring Arav's endless calls. Hearing this, Aisha was completely shaken to the core. Showing the photos lying in the drawer to her uncle, she asks, "Whose photos are these?" Uncle says, "These are pictures of Arav's first girlfriend. I've met all of them. I've only met her once. Every time I'd see a new girl with him. I don't know what happened to her. I never asked his anything because the doctor had told me not to talk to Arav about anything that might anger him. Otherwise, he might do anything in a fit of rage." Aisha was looking at those photos. Although all of them had one thing in common. All the girls in those pictures were extremely beautiful. There was another photo on that door. Picked up the photo with her trembling hands and began to look at it. Aisha's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of that photo. The photo wasn't anyone else's, but it was her own. Seeing her photo on that door, Aisha felt goosebumps all over her body. Slowly, Aisha began to understand everything. Aisha couldn't bear it anymore. She ran home and closed the door of her room and sat in a corner. She wanted to scream loudly, but no sound came from her mouth. I couldn't get out. She was just standing there when her phone started ringing. It was Arav calling. 101 rings. Even after Aisha didn't pick up the phone, she no longer had the courage to talk to him. Many days passed. Aisha didn't go to college. She didn't meet anyone, nor did she talk to anyone. She just closed the door to her room. She sat alone, staring at her diary. Today, for the first time, she started hating her diary. A week later, the newspaper carried a grim headline. Young man jumps from building after girl rejects him. Arav's photograph stared back at her from the front page. From that day on, Aisha stopped speaking. She sat in her room for hours, whispering to the walls, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Mira shivered as Lena's story ended. The flickering hospital lights dimmed and then went out completely. The corridor fell into darkness. Mira fumbled for her phone. "Lena, are you here?" she whispered. But there was no answer. On the desk lay a hastily scribbled note. "Emergency call. Had to leave. Back in an hour." Mira's heart thudded in her chest. She turned slowly and saw a shadow moving in the corner of the corridor. A tall figure stepped out, smiling crookedly, his eyes glinting like cold steel. "You're beautiful too," he whispered. "Beautiful things belong only to me." He began to laugh, low at first, then louder and louder, echoing down the hallway. Mira froze where she stood. There was a huge difference between the world of dreams and the world of reality. Sometimes that difference can kill.